Chapter 3. I Need Pizza. My mother had this beautiful wooden board inherited from her mom, who had it made to measure by a carpenter. She worked all her dough by hand on top of this board, starting with some flour right in the middle, measuring by eye. Then she poked a hole into the flour and poured the liquid ingredients, eggs in the case of fresh pasta, water when making pizza. The latter case is the one we are more interested in right now, obviously. She first heated a little bit of water using a small pot and then added some fresh yeast. In Italy it's very common and it's usually sold in cubes weighing 25 grams. My mom always used a whole one. She dissolved it using a teaspoon and then poured the mixture on the flour, as said before. In this phase she used to add salt too. The not so funny part was when the water started to overflow from its flour basin, and it was necessary to catch it before it fell from the board. On a second thought, it was actually quite funny to watch my mother's expressions when she was trying to solve the situation. By the way, when there were no more torrents in sight, she started kneading and kneading until the dough wasn't sticky anymore. To help herself with this, she used to add some extra flour little by little. Eventually, when she finished kneading and the dough was ready, its consistency was pretty firm and sometimes it was not too smooth. At that point it was time to let the dough leaven. Usually it took about 1 hour to rise and reach the right size, which is supposed to be at least twice the original. However, the wait was often a couple of hours. Sometimes it was longer, and some other times, the really bad ones, the disaster happened. The dough did not rise at all, much to my mom's great dismay. This was pretty much the very same procedure I followed for a long time, and I experienced myself different dough textures, different rising times, and different untold curses when something went wrong. Good for me, the issues I encountered became less and less, as in the following years I have studied a lot and I learned many lessons on my own. But the best part came when I got into the pizzeria and the experienced professionals I had the luck to work with taught me many more lessons. I learned one of the earliest lessons, and probably the first one related to the preparation of the dough, during my very first day as an apprentice. It was a lucky occurrence, because often the master pizza makers are quite jealous of the recipe and they are reluctant to share it with anybody, let alone the new kid on the block who just came into their shop. Instead, I seen my teacher making his dough straight away. He actually showed me the procedure and described me everything he was doing it and why. So how a professional makes his dough? First of all, he does his calculations. We pizzaioli know that for each liter of water we use, we will get a certain number of doubles, often 12, if you consider the average weight of each of them. And 12 is also the number of doubles that will fit inside the typical trays employed in the pizzeria. Basically, professionals just try to make their life easier, so let's follow their example when making pizza at home. You will see later on that the recipe we will use involves using 100 grams of water per person as an easy number to remember and an easy way for us to do our calculations and figure out how much flour we will need. Please note that this will be the exact total amount of flour we will use, never an extra gram, rather one less. Recipes gives exact doses for a reason. We don't want to change them or alter their balance. Besides, another good reason why I like to start with water when I make pizza in my kitchen is that the process certainly seems simpler, quicker and cleaner to me. I use a bowl, so all the dough remains inside it. No particular attention is necessary, since those sudden water overflows would be impossible. Little rivers of water flowing outside of the flour, all over my board and possibly on my floor. I don't fear you anymore. Ha! Let's start with the water then, and let's use it as it comes out of the tap. Room temperature, we don't need to heat it, as this could lead to some problems if we are not careful. We only need one requirement. It has to be drinkable. Although I have met people saying that the secret to making a good pizza is water, I think that this affirmation has no rational foundation whatsoever. The water is tasteless, and even if its content in mineral salt can vary, as well as its pH, this does not affect in a significant way the quality or taste of the slice you're biting. So there is no reason why we should be particularly interested in these details. Let me widen the topic for one moment. There are a few liquids that you can use, either as a replacement for water or as an addition. One of them is sparkling water. This makes sense. The bubbles are made adding carbon dioxide. That is the very same gas produced by yeast's breathing. This could help the leavening, and some say that it gives a crunchier texture to the crust. The same concept is behind the use of beer. Plus, remember, the beer itself contains actual yeast, although in small amounts. Finally, it has a flavor of its own, and this will certainly give your pizza a different taste. We could even use milk, but we would enter a different territory here. Although I can't exclude that there are professional pizza makers using milk in the dough, I've never had the chance to meet any of them. However, milk is commonly used in bread making, and it is known to make your final product nice and soft. If you aim to give fluffiness to your homemade pizza, you can consider substituting half of the water with milk. If you feel like daring, use milk only. You can expect a different, richer flavor too, due to the extra fat you are introducing. I did a couple of experiments, but the result wasn't my cup of tea, maybe too ordinary. Last but not least, a word about olive oil, since many pizza makers use it in their dough, and I did it myself on many occasions. I want to mention it here because we're talking about liquids, but obviously you're not going to prepare a dough with olive oil instead of water. It is considered rather as an additive, and you can use it to get certain features if you're looking for them. Your dough will be more extensible and flexible. Your pizza will develop a slightly bigger volume and will be softer. If you plan to use olive oil in your dough, there is a right time to add it. You will read about it further in the book. For now, make a note to self. We would only use extra virgin olive oil. But it's time to come back to our dough now. Once the water has been poured into your bowl or mixer, it's time to add the ingredient that will make a difference, the yeast. Without it, our dough will not rise at all, and if you try to cook it, you would only get a flat, not so soft, sad disc you would not enjoy too much eating. So we need yeast for its ability to let our dough rise, right? But how is that possible? Remember that yeast is a biological entity. It belongs to the fungus family, and you would easily find it in the environment in its free state. While it carries out its metabolism, it produces some gas, in particular carbon dioxide, just like us. As we have created a nice gluten network, thanks to the proteins in our flour and the strength in our mighty arms, the dough will rise because the gas has no chance to go anywhere. We refer to this process as leavening or proofing. One of the main differences between what we do in the pizzeria and what the average home cook does lies on the way yeast is used, or rather in the use quantity. I bet that Googling pizza dough recipes, you stumbled upon these doses. 500 grams of flour and 1 level tablespoon dry yeast, usually around 15 grams, or maybe 1 sachet around 7 grams. Slightly better, but still not good enough. Also, the typical recipe recommends to dissolve the yeast in warm or lukewarm water. Furthermore, it is often suggested to add sugar to help the yeast. With these amounts and these conditions, once the yeast will start doing its thing, it will do it pretty fast. The leavening process would accelerate too much, and the dough will double up its sides quickly, typically between 45 minutes and 1 hour. Do you remember what I said about the maturation and fermentation of the dough? I said it takes time. We are talking about hours here. But despite this, someone is now telling you to speed up the process by 3 or 4 times, best case scenario. In substance, it is suggested to make a plain blend dough, reluctant when you stretch it and probably a bit harder to digest. If the right amount of yeast is not the one indicated by the manufacturer's direction for use, how much should we use then? Well, there is no hard and fast rule, as we will always need to consider that important extra factor that is the temperature of our room. But as we will see later on, we can manage the temperature somehow, so let's stick to a rule of thumb for our purpose. Using up to 450 to 500 grams of flour, you will add only 1 gram of yeast. Up to 900 to 1000 grams of flour, you will add 2 grams of yeast, and so on. If you are not already familiar with my fabulous dough calculator, then just check my website and take advantage of this simple free tool. It will tell you the exact doses you need. Finally, let's become familiar with the two most common kinds of yeast we find on the shelves of the supermarket. You will find the active and the instant yeast, often referred to as quick action, fast action, or something related to the speed of its activity. They are both dried through an industrial process, very aggressive in the case of active yeast, a little less in the case of instant. This implies a slightly different way of using them, as you will see in a moment. The active yeast comes in small granules, which are simply cells of yeast covered by starch. The manufacturer always suggests to activate it in water, where the starch will dissolve and the actual yeast will be released. Often the addition of a pinch of sugar is recommended. The instant yeast comes in tiny sticks and it doesn't need any special treatment. You can use it straight away. It's usually recommended to sprinkle it onto the flour, since it will start its activity once it will meet the water or the liquid. These are pretty much the same kind of yeast we use in many pizza shops here in London, where I live at the moment. I am pretty happy with the results I get with dried yeast, to the point that even if fresh yeast was easier to find, I'm not 100% sure I would use it. Probably I would only do it to be respectful of the tradition I used to follow in Italy. However, try and find it if you want. Maybe they use it in your favorite bakery and you can ask them if they can sell you a little piece. If you manage to find it, keep in mind that you should use 2.5 times the amount of dry yeast you would use in your recipe.